So this is a recap on several different topics. The first one is going to be the difference between the term grouping, meshing, and linking, which are three completely different operations, yet they can be easily confused with each other at times. On my scene here, I have 4 individual boxes. Each one is identified by a different color and a name. Let's say, for argument's sake, these 3 items are placed in my scene at an exact point where they're all in reference to each other. Maybe assume they're furniture for some reason and that there's enough room in between each piece of furniture. I want to obtain this spacing and this exact setup with these objects. I want to put them in a group. And the easiest way to explain that is to just show you. I'm going to highlight all 4 objects at the same time. And with all 4 selected, I can tell they have the white bounding box. I'm going to use the word group. Now when I do this, it's going to ask me for a group name. So I could put boxes. Now what I've done is I've created a group. It's one solid object that pretty much is obtaining these 4. Now the nice thing about grouping is it can be temporary. I currently cannot manipulate one of these boxes. No matter what box I select, I still have this main pivot point in the center of all my objects. So this is sort of like a category. A prime example of when you'd use this is if maybe you have all your furniture set up in the house. You can group all of your furniture together. That way, if you want to move the furniture out of the house altogether in the same spot and place it back in there, everything's still in the same location in reference to itself. Now, the beauty of grouping is several different things here. One is you can always ungroup, which would release these 4 from being constrained to each other. Or you can hit open. And when you hit open, you'll notice there's still this pink bounding box. The items are acknowledging the fact that they're still grouped, but you have the ability to work on each box individually. Maybe you want to change a color. Or maybe you want to move the object slightly. Now, no matter what object you select in the group, if you hit close, you now have all 4 back together in the same initial group that you named called boxes. So again, this is just a nice way of temporary organizing objects that you do not have intentions on meshing them together. And again, I'm going to show you what meshing is here in a second, but this is just a temporary organizing of multiple objects. Now I'm going to go ahead and ungroup that, and now I'm back to 4 boxes. The next thing I want to show you is meshing. Now there are 2 approaches to meshing. You probably know them both, but you may not be aware of how simple it is. The first one is to select any of the objects and apply the compound object Boolean method. So I go into compound objects, Boolean, and I have a union option, which allows me to go ahead and say, voila, these 2 boxes are now one object. Now, if I want to add the other ones, I have to click off, back on, and complete the same procedure over again. Pretty much adding only one object to the Boolean at a time. This can be very time consuming if you have, say, 100 items that you want to combine together. So I'm going to Control Z this and get back to where all of my objects are individual. We'll do one more here, Control Z. A faster, more efficient way is to use the modifier called Edit Mesh. Once I select Edit Mesh, I have 2 options again. I can select Attach, which will allow me just to click on the various objects, or I can select Attach List, which will give me a list of all the objects within the entire scene, and I can simply select the first one, hold Shift, and grab the last. And now, simultaneously, all 4 of my boxes have been attached to each other. Notice, regardless of Boolean or Edit Mesh Attach, these objects all take on the same color. They inherit the same base material. This will be relevant later on when we actually get into materials. But for now, this is one object, and the only way to manipulate these objects is to go in and use the edit mesh to actually go and move vertices around. Now there's one other method here. I'm going to go way back, and that is going to be linking. Now linking is typically made for animation purposes, but since we haven't covered animation yet, this is really just going to be kind of a preliminary, getting you started thinking about how your animation will work. Let me give you an example here, and what I'll do is I'll delete these boxes, and I'm going to start off with a nice simple shape such as this box, and I'm going to make 4 identical copies of it. Make 3 actually. Assume these are a train for a second. The head car I'm going to make is blue. If we talk about trains being linked together, a train engine, when it goes, it pulls this car. This car pulls this car pulls this car, and so on. However, if we come back here and we pull this car, we are not able to pull the remaining cars and the engine. So let's think about that for a second when we start to link. You grab an object, and using the linking tool, you're going to click the object, drag over to the object that you want, which is the blue box, and release. The blue box will blink once. This now means that if I move the blue box, it will pull the car behind it. But if I go the other way, that car moves independently. Let's repeat the same procedure again. This time I'm going to go to this box and link it to the next car in line. Again, moving the main box will pull all 3 cars, but each box will independently move based off of its hierarchy link. Finally, I will take the link tool, click on the tool on the box, drag it to the next box, release, it blinks. This is a one-way hierarchy. The blue box is the control point, which means anything I do to the blue box, all the others will move. However, each one of these independently controls the next series of boxes linked behind. It's a child-to-parent relationship. Let's look at a little bit more practical use for this. If you want to follow along, you can do so by going into Angel. Underneath the Lessons tab, we have a file called Robot Linking Example Max file. By clicking on that and hitting the linking robot zip file, save this to your desktop, or just in the download menu, go ahead and extract that out and take the linking robot file, the 3D, the Max file, and drag that on your desktop. Then go ahead and insert that into your Max file, or just double click on it to open up Max. I'll go ahead and bring that in. Okay, what we have here is a robot, and it's just a very quick looking robot. I'll go ahead and run through why I only have one arm, and that's the reason is because I eventually am going to mirror this arm over. But before I mirror it, I actually want to create the linking hierarchy so that I don't have to redo that on the other side. If you notice in the support file that I've offered there in Angel, I've named all the body parts. So we have the chest, we have the waist, a head, neck, we've got an upper arm, a lower arm, and a hand. Same procedure is going to work as we did before. We're going to link this object together. Now, don't do that at this point. Just go ahead and watch me, and then you'll see what's going to happen. I'm going to click, and I'm going to link from the hand to the arm. So what that pretty much means is when I move my arm, the hand goes with it. Now there is a slight problem here. As you can see in my robot, that when I do rotate it, the pivot point, the hinge area of that arm is not perfectly set. It's actually off-centered. In a few moments, I'm going to show you how to adjust that. I come over here and I start rotating my hand, and if you can notice, the hand is starting to distort. Here it's skinny, there it's fat, and it actually is like skin stretching. We do not want that. One of the reasons we don't want that, I'm going to Control Z this until we get back. One of the reasons we don't want this is robots are typically made of metal. Metal does not distort when it moves. Skin, on the other hand, does. So we're going to use a technique here that's going to help us control these body parts. Think of these body parts as bones. Bones do not bend and flex, but the cartilage in between them does. So we're going to create some invisible cartilage in between each part, which is going to allow us to control this robot a little bit more efficiently. But before we do that, let's take a look again at our problem here, where I was trying to move the arm, and no matter, what happens is the arm actually falls off. And that's because when an object is selected, the transform gizmo represents the pivot point, the central location of that object. When you do something such as edit mesh or combining objects, that central point can change depending on what shape, because we had two shapes in one. It sort of closes the gap between the two, or it takes over the original. Regardless of how it happens, let me show you how to fix that. With the object selected, we come to the third tab over here called Hierarchy. Hierarchy has a lot of different options. The only one we're going to look at today is with the word pivot selected, affect pivot only. Once you have affect pivot only selected, your move tool will now move the pivot area and not the object selected. So again, we're going to locate that right here in the center of that ball joint there. But remember, we're in a 3D model. Just because it looks centered here doesn't necessarily mean it's centered in the other views. So definitely go into your top view. And for the most part now, I'm pretty happy with that. It looks centered. I can also go to my left view, and again, pretty close to the centered object. Once I'm done, I have to turn off affect pivot only. If not, everything I do will just affect the pivot and not the actual object. Now what you'll notice is if I go back and rotate that object, it actually spins and rotates on this ball joint, which looks a lot more practical. That's what it was made for. So your next step should be to go through each part of your robot and determine where these pivot points are located. And again, I'm looking here. The pivot point is on the edge over here, not on the center of this object. And I did this on purpose. So again, go in to affect pivot only and slide that over to the center of the geosphere that represents the center point of that ball joint, and then select off. You also want to look at the torso or the upper chest. The upper chest is going to bend down here. When we bend over at the waist. So we want to take that pivot point of the torso and put it down here into the waist area. The neck, same way. Select the neck, make sure the neck is at the base, maybe even a little higher up here. You may have to use different views. As well as the head should pivot where the neck is at. Now, the next step is to go in and add this little, I guess you could say, cartilage or ligaments in between the various robotic parts which will help to avoid deformation. These pieces are called dummies. To create a dummy, you go to Create. We slide over to the little tape measure that says Helpers. Once you select Helpers, the very first option is called Dummy. When you select a dummy, you can click and drag, and no matter what you try to do, a dummy is a box and there's nothing you can do about it. The dummy by default is a bright green. If I was to render this right now, you cannot see a dummy. It is an invisible object. So therefore, the dummy can be scaled and rotated, but the dummy does not have to be any particular size. I am going to place a dummy in between each set of limbs. And I'm going to make mine a little smaller. Again, using both viewports, I have to come out here and put it right in between the two objects. Fantastic. Let's do another one. Create another dummy. Come down here. I'm going to put that right in the middle of the arm joint. But again, I have to make sure it is in all views. Create another dummy. Up here. Get it pretty centered, as centered as you can get it right now. One right there. Put a dummy down here in the waist. I'm going to put a dummy up here in the neck. One in the back of the head. In a moment here, I'm going to show you how these are actually going to help. Now, my next step here is to link this together. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to link the arm first, all together in one piece, mirror it over, and then show you how that works. But I'm going to go here, and I'm actually going to go into wireframe for a second, which is going to get a little messy, but bear with me and zoom in. Use your workspace. Click the hand. And when you're in wireframe, you have to go from the wireframe itself. You can click and drag from the wireframe to the green part of the dummy. Release, it flashes. Now the dummy gets linked to the blue arm. The blue arm gets linked to the dummy. The dummy gets linked to the green arm. The green arm gets linked to the dummy. The dummy gets linked to the purple chest. The purple chest gets linked to the green dummy. And then that goes down to the torso. So ultimately what we have here is if I come down here and I go to rotate my waist, almost the whole body goes. Let's go ahead and turn that into smooth and highlights. We're still missing the head and the neck because we haven't done that yet. So I can go in here, back into my wireframe mode just to show you. And again, I'm going to go head to the dummy, dummy to the neck, neck to the dummy, dummy to the chest. One last thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into my front view and I'm going to mirror over the arm and all of the adjoining dummies. Now click and drag a window around the objects you need. Hit mirror. Hit copy. Okay. Slide that into place. Maybe in this other arm socket here. And now what you're going to have to do is this last dummy is going to have to be relinked, I believe. Let me test it here. Oh, nope, it held. So now when I rotate the waist, the whole body goes. But each individual element can be moved individually with all the adjoining parts. Now, without going too far ahead, because we're not really worried about animation just yet, I do want to show you once everything is linked, animating is very simple. So I'm just going to hit play, and I've already set up my keyframes, but the various parts of this object now being all linked were simply animated just by keyframing the objects in the different ways. So now I have a little dancing robot here. So I encourage you to practice with this reference file, but then go out to your actual robot and start designating these parts. Now, as I've told the class, you do not need to have your pivot points set for your progress renderings that are due this week coming up. However, I want you to think ahead and at least start preparing to have things linked properly so that you can kind of have it all set up once we got to animate. That way we won't have to go back and play around with all of the animation. So that is it for this lesson. Good luck. Give me an email if you have any questions.